So welcome to the webinar on moving from worry to wisdom. My name is Jill Bell. I'm honored that you're spending some of your Sunday afternoon with me. First, I want to thank the MAPP Alumni Association for creating this forum for us to help and serve each other, come together and talk about strategies to thrive during these uncertain times. So as we navigate these uncharted waters of COVID-19, I wanted to share some ideas with you that I've been noodling with over many years and actually been trying to apply here during this crisis that have helped me a little bit, especially taming my tendency to catastrophize and worry. So who am I? I graduated with the class of 2019 MAPP at University of Pennsylvania a year ago. For my capstone, I studied wisdom, in particular wisdom in corporations, how to heal business through bringing wise leadership and building wisdom-based organizations. I spent the 3 years prior to MAPP in the corporate world, both as management consultant and as an executive, primarily in the healthcare industry. And now I work as a leadership and executive coach and am trained through the Institute of Coaching out of Harvard Medical School and life coach out of Martha Beck Institute. I have an MBA from Harvard and an engineering degree from Princeton, where I followed in the very hollowed shoes of our MAPP founder, Marty Seligman. My signature strengths are love of learning, appreciation of beauty and excellence, creativity, and social intelligence. You'll notice wisdom isn't a major theme, although some of them are correlated a little bit. So as they say, we study and teach what we need to learn. So please know I am bringing these ideas to you, not as someone who considers herself wise or enlightened in any way, but as someone who struggles with worry, anxiety, and catastrophizing too often and has found a way to some peace from some big time anxiety through these practices of wisdom. I also want to thank Raphael Houston, who left a 2-year-old birthday party early to play wingman for me and help with technology. He's going to be monitoring your questions and comments. And he also helped really encourage me to do this webinar, my first. And also Kelly Cummings, who also encouraged me and shared her great insights in preparing the webinar. So let's get started. So what does it mean to worry? The word worry comes from the Old English rygan, W-R-Y-G-A-N, which originally meant to strangle. And then it evolved over the years to mean first harass and then cause anxiety, which is how we know it. So I just find it so interesting that when we can't let go of worry, we actually can feel strangled and harassed by sort of incessant thoughts themselves. The American Psychological Association defines worry this way that you see here: a state of mental distress or agitation due to concern about an impending or anticipated event, threat, or danger. And I think the key words here are mental and impending or anticipated. Worry is all about conjuring an unknown future in our minds and letting our minds convince us that the imagined future is real. Our bodies don't know the difference between anticipated stress and real ones. They react the same way. And when we anticipate a future with fear, dread, and worry, our entire system goes on high alert. I'm sure, on the other hand, we can all think of situations where worry can actually help us. The way you might worry that you have spinach in your teeth while going to a job interview or a webinar. It may prompt you to check the mirror before the interview, or maybe have a less vulnerable lunch. And sometimes worry can be a call to action itself, like, I'm worried about this cough, I better go get it checked out. We can also have a false sense of safety from worry, as when I worry that it might prevent the thing that we're worrying about from actually happening. So as an example, when I worry about my son going backcountry skiing, that he might get caught in an avalanche, somehow I feel that I can prevent it by happening by just hanging on really tightly. Of course, the bad news is worry is not prevention. It doesn't work that way. but it can help us determine actions within our control that might tip the odds in our favor. So as coach and positive psychologist, we often attempt to trace human behaviors, reactions, and emotion to our evolutionary roots. How often have we heard or used the proverbial saber-toothed tiger at the cave to explain our fight, flight, or freeze instinct to even small perceived dangers? Reminding ourselves that we no longer encounter saber-toothed tigers in contemporary life can help differentiate between real, warranted fear of survival and our day-to-day worries, like the boss calling us into his office and when there's rumors of layoffs happening. Well, right now, things are different. This is our saber-toothed tiger. It's real. It's truly threatening our survival, both biologically, economically, and socially. And like the tigers of yore, it is certainly keeping us in our caves. But it does it warrant biological stress response of fight, flight, or freeze? We don't know if this COVID tiger is at our cave entrance or at our neighbors. It's invisible. Certainly the worry is helpful to keep us informed and make sure we are careful and stay safe now and when things go back to, or when things open up. And it's important to take those worries and understand what we need to, the lessons we need to learn and pull from them, of course. However, it can also harm us and can send us in a downward spiral of negativity and even depression. And it can stifle creativity, that the actual energy and optimism we need to deal with the crisis itself, to help our loved ones who may need us, to take care of our own health and our unknown futures. Dr. Allison Block, a physician in the San Francisco Bay Area, published this sobering article in the Washington Post about a month ago as the COVID virus started invading our shores. It illustrates the paralyzing effects of constant fight, flight, or freeze response to our COVID tiger. She said of herself and her fellow healthcare workers, "I'm not anxious, I'm pre-traumatized." She writes, "Doctors and nurses see news from our colleagues in China, South Korea, and Italy." Again, this was March 18th, letting us know in no uncertain terms what is coming. The result is that we are all feeling the psychological ramifications of the trauma. We just haven't experienced it yet. So while there's been some limited research on the concept of pre-traumatic stress, whether it even exists and if it's a precursor for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it's a powerful concept and an example of the debilitating way worry can stop us in our tracks and prevent us from doing our best work. So the question is, even when this threat is very real, and even when there's plenty of evidence that the future could unfold as Dr. Block imagines, if you haven't read the article, it's pretty powerful. And all of us who are carrying this reasonable, logical, and yet debilitating worry, not just healthcare workers, all of us, then how can we benefit, or can we, from letting it go, from pausing to ask, where can we help, and how is it helping us? Where can it point us in a direction of action, of prevention, or maybe risk mitigation? And then how can we act on that control? And the key, how can we let go of the rest of the burden, the pictures of the future that aren't serving us and don't allow us to show up fully, to do our best work, our best caregiving for ourselves or for others? So what tools can help? That's the question I was asking myself when I pulled this together. I looked at both positive psychology and back to the ancient philosophers to doctor up some solutions based on wisdom for myself, and hope they might be useful to you as well. So why let go of worry at all? Well, besides the emotional burden of worry, it can take a physical toll. Well, worry and anxiety aren't, they're not the same thing. They're close cousins, but they're not twins. Excessive worry can indeed lead to anxiety disorder and even depression. And many studies, two recent ones, have reported that anxiety can lead to the development of disease, and in particular, cardiovascular and respiratory disease, even in initially healthy adults. So ironically, worrying excessively about COVID-19 can actually make us more susceptible to it. Both Seneca and Mark Twain just capture the lessons of worry beautifully for me. Seneca, there's nothing so wretched or foolish as to anticipate misfortunes. What madness it is, and you're expecting evil before it arrives. And Mark Twain, although some say this might have been Winston Churchill, I'm an old man and have known a great many troubles, but most of them never happened. And I learned this lesson so well, and I try to hold on to it whenever I can. About 18 years ago, during my first ever therapy session. The week before, I received the dreaded knock at the door, my friends telling me my husband had crashed on his bicycle on his way home from work and was in the ICU with head trauma. Yes, he was wearing a helmet. He stroked the following night and lay in a coma while our entire family played vigil and prayed for a miracle. So during that therapy session, the therapist asked me to tell her what the doctors were telling me, what the prognosis was, what I was worried about. And then she asked me about my worst fear. I laid out about 5 options that I'd pieced together from all the consults with the neurologists and the surgeons, and none of them good, ranging from paralyzed on one side with limited cognitive ability as the best case to death. And I had been trying so hard to work through each scenario and plan and figure out how to protect my children and myself and what we were going to do in each of those situations to try and feel some control. And I thought she was going to help me with that. But instead, she gave me such a gift. She basically told me what Seneca and Mark Twain are telling us, that our bodies don't understand the difference between real danger and anticipated danger. So we react the same whether we are creating the danger in our minds or experiencing it in 3D Technicolor. So when we create trauma in our minds ahead of experience the real trauma down the road, even when we know exactly what's coming, our bodies and our minds are experiencing the pain twice once it actually occurs. And then when we imagine multiple traumatic what-if scenarios like I was doing, we're increasing the toll on our bodies and the health effects multifold. And then when we ruminate on them, which a lot of us are doing during this crisis, we experience each imagined future scenario as if it's really happening over and over and over. So let's agree to stop doing this. So how? Let's work at it. I think it's taking too much of a toll anyway to ruin our bodies and our mental health at the same time. So when the reality is, when the time comes, we'll only have, this is the therapist telling me, you're going to only have one scenario that you're going to have to deal with. And the human spirit was made to rise up and deal with trauma and difficult situations. So she taught me then some mindfulness and breathing exercises, and I tried to use them, and it helped. And it was hard, but I was able to actually stay more present in the moment and let go of all the what ifs and just wait and see what unfolded and then deal with it. And about a week later, I got my worst case scenario. My husband died. And she was right. As predicted over time, I survived it. I was able to rise up, build a new normal for myself, my children, my new family. I'm just full of joy and adventure and love. And no, of course, I wouldn't have chosen that path, but worrying about it before it happened was useless. It didn't help prevent it. It didn't help me deal with it, and it didn't help me heal. I had to let the deep kind of animal instinct in me, the inner knowing, the inner wisdom, lead the path. And that's what we all have to do in this situation. There's just no bouncing back when you're in a crisis like this. There's only bouncing forward. There's not going back to the way life was before. Maybe, but probably it's going to be a new normal. And we just don't know what's ahead of us. So we can think about all the scenarios and live the trauma over and over and over, or we can be present, do what we can, and wait and see how that's going to play out. So wisdom can help us with that. However, often we get these kind of platitudes. They just don't work, and frankly, they're insulting. So when we're ready to start letting go of the tense, anxious, worried thoughts, what can we do? We need to turn to our inner wisdom, and it can pave the path to truth. And as our ancient philosophers and great religious leaders in the world over time have all promised us, truth shall set us free. So I believe wisdom offers a path to freedom. So if I haven't convinced you yet, why move from worry to wisdom? We've talked about the ill effects of worry, also some positive directions that we can glean from examining our worry. But moving from worry to wisdom, from anxiety to action, actually takes courage. It's not easy. It's hard to let go of worry and negativity. It's hard for me to know my son's going out backcountry skiing in deep snow and let go of the worry that he might get buried in an avalanche, because it's not going to stop it from happening. And then if it does, I'll have to deal with it. So it's not for the lighthearted. It's something that you really have to make a decision to do. And some of these tools, I think, can help us do it. I think we have a new puppy, and my puppy loves to play fetch, but she can't stand letting go of what she's fetched. So she'll bring it, and then she wants me to throw her the ball again, but she won't let go of the ball because she's afraid she won't get it again. So I will make you this promise. If you try this and you'd rather have your worry back, just let it go. It'll be waiting there for you. The negativity bias is in our nature. So rest assured, you can always go back to gripping the ball, and that's okay. Sometimes we're just not ready to move forward, especially in times of crises. And you know, the interesting thing is wisdom doesn't ask us to let go of negativity. It asks us to examine it with the lenses of purpose, perspective, balance, and service. Wisdom allows us to feel, not deny, the underlying emotions of worry like anger, fear, stress, and grief. They're all valid emotions. Our job is to discern where they're helpful and use the worry to find positive momentum forward through ethical and purposeful action toward a common good. So wisdom opens us to a more purposeful, happier, healthier, resilient, and empowered future, instead of, or even in spite of, the one we fear. Wisdom's always a path of action, and therefore always a path to empowerment. Worry without wisdom is the opposite, a path of mental anguish and no action. So let's start by defining wisdom. As the foundation for my MAPP capstone at the University of Pennsylvania, I conducted an extensive literature review of wisdom definitions. And from ancient Western and Eastern philosophy, from all the world religions, traditional psychology, positive psychology, gerontology, contemporary spiritual practices, I derived this definition you see here. So I believe wisdom is the ability to apply knowledge and lived experience, tempered with morality, judgment, intuition, creativity, prudence, and broad perspective. These are all strengths that have been correlated with wisdom. To discern and act upon the right and ethical course of action. That balance multiple needs and conflicting interests in the midst of complexity and uncertainty, in order to fulfill an inherent purpose greater than oneself toward the common good. So in other words, wisdom is knowing the right thing to do in the right way towards the right ends, including the common good. So I've distilled this definition into its 7 core elements, which then I've tried to derive a roadmap to help us move away from worry toward inner wisdom as an end in and of itself and toward well-being. So these 7 elements are purpose, experience, which includes life experience, knowledge, accumulated knowledge, and our strengths. Discernment, balance is looking for the both and instead of the either or solution. Action, transcendence, looking for something greater than oneself, and toward the common good. I like to think of the purpose and the common good as the bookends to wisdom. Those were requirements of practical wisdom or phronesis from Aristotle, which without, he would say, it would not be wise. So here's the 7 steps to wisdom that reflect those 7 elements, the key building blocks. And although we'll approach them linearly, they really are not mutually exclusive and should be considered in constant interplay with each other. Again, with the purpose and common good kind of playing the bookends and the compass for everything else. So together they create agency, self-efficacy, self-confidence to be able to make things happen, to overcome almost any obstacle, especially worry. For the sake of ease, I'm going to just focus on steps 3, 4, and 5, and for the sake of time as well. And I'll go real quickly through the others just to give you a sense of how you might be able to walk through this yourself. And I just also want to say I've been practicing this just recently, and I'm finding it's helpful for just those day-to-day nagging worries, like getting up and doing a webinar, and the big saber-toothed tigers. So step 1, remembering your purpose. Aristotle believed that to call an action wise, it must first be grounded in purpose. His concept of telos, or the inherent purpose or the aim of an activity, is the foundation for wisdom, according to Aristotle. And Aristotle, as well as Socrates before him, believed that the inherent telos, or purpose, of a human being is happiness, or what they called eudaimonia, which is a term meaning overall well-being or flourishing or thriving for a human. So we all share this core purpose, but we have individual paths to pursue unique aims toward this human sense of human flourishing. So step 1 is basically to consider what you feel your inherent purpose is, in the spirit of adding to your own well-being and that of all humanity. It's not an easy task. It sounds easy to what's your purpose, but this takes a lot of discernment and a lot of going deep, and I'd recommend a full kind of deep dive through a meditation practice as well to do this if you haven't done that already. So step 2, inventory your strengths. This is the experience piece. So strengths include your lived experience, which is why wisdom is often attributed to the elderly, because they have more of it than the rest of you, I should say. We have more of it. Getting there. Knowledge, accumulated, school knowledge, street knowledge, things that you actually know, information, and then your signature strengths. And that signature strengths are those character strengths or virtues that come most naturally to you, that really define you at your core, who you are fundamentally. Without those strengths, you would feel lost and you wouldn't really know how to act. Then looking at this signature strengths in terms of the key strengths of wisdom that have been correlated with wisdom and how you might apply those to help alleviate some of this anxiety going forward. So research shows that focusing on your strengths instead of weaknesses improves well-being and health, helps navigate challenges like the one we're in now, and helps elevate mood, and it also improves relationships. So step 3 is about discernment. I'm going to go more deeply into this one because this is a kind of core of how we might be able to loosen the teeth of our worry. Byron Katie uses these terms I love, clean pain versus dirty pain, to differentiate between what's the truth and what she calls our lies or stories we make about our circumstances. So as an example, clean pain would be my puppy bites my hand and it hurts. So the hurt, the pain is real. When my husband died, the grief was real. That's clean pain. It didn't feel clean, but it's just, it's pure. It's just our animal instinct experiencing some kind of pain. Dirty pain is the stories we tell about that, what we make it mean or our assumptions about that. So my puppy biting me, I might think, oh, this puppy's gonna grow up to be a brute. I shouldn't have got a puppy. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to train her. All those are painful thoughts that really aren't serving me. When my husband died, I thought, I'm never gonna find love or be loved again or find someone to love again. My kids are gonna be totally messed up without a dad. I'm not gonna be able to handle this. I don't know how to move forward or live without him. That's all dirty pain. I don't know if those are true or not, and I could just as easily come up with other alternative thoughts that serve me better. Which leads me, get some water, to a tool to help with this, and the next one called ATC, sometimes ABC, where thought is belief. So the ATC model comes from cognitive therapy. It's also a great tool in resilience training and to build resilience. And what it says is you have an adversity or a circumstance like COVID-19 being here, and that's just a fact. Then we have thoughts about that, this dirty pain. Sometimes it's not negative thoughts, sometimes it can be positive thoughts too. And then there's the consequence or the outcomes. We often attribute the outcomes to the adversity. So COVID-19's here, so I'm worried. But it's not the circumstance that's making us worried. It's the thought about the circumstance. So this ATC process, cognitive therapy, takes us back to that middle step and helps us examine and question that thought to see how it's serving us and if we might come up with an alternative. So as an example, when the stock market crashed, my thought was, oh my gosh, we're going to go bankrupt. I'm going to lose my house. We're going to lose everything. My parents, who I think are on here, can attest. So my consequences were panic and impetuous, reactive decisions and financial decisions, some of which may have turned out to serve me well, others definitely did not. What I could have, if I had taken the time to really understand and examine that, I could have instead said, stock markets go in cycles, they always have. We've got enough to tide this through for quite a while, and it probably is all going to be okay. I don't know if that's as true or truer as the other one, but when I think of those thoughts, the consequence, instead of worry and panic, end up being more calm and more deliberate, careful financial planning and decision making. So given that we don't know which of those thoughts is true, probably neither of them are exactly true, why not choose the one that serves us better? We tend to go to the negative. We confirm, we have a negativity bias based on that saber-toothed tiger. And so it's really important to discern the truth in there and really consider the opposites. So both of these techniques really help us move from pessimism to optimism, from helplessness to hope. Learned optimism, a concept articulated by Dr. Martin Seligman, the founder of positive psychology and the MAPP program at University of Pennsylvania. And learned optimism is one of the foundational tenets of positive psychology. Marty's research shows us that we're not tied by destiny to pessimism, but can learn to be an optimist and learn more optimistic practices. So this explanatory style, when explaining negative events like a COVID pandemic, optimists tend to externalize the event. They don't take it personally. They don't think it's their fault. They did something bad. God's punishing them. It's out there. It happened. Bummer. But they don't own it. They don't see it as permanent. This too shall pass. And they they constrain their concern to the negative event itself instead of painting a doom and gloom situation across the entirety of their lives and entirety of time. So practice those helps us discern truth from worry and things that are not going to serve us. Step 4, looking for the both and. This is about balance. So practical wisdom is all about finding the middle way, using experience, knowledge, and our strengths, like creativity and judgment, to discern alternatives, which may not at first glance seem obvious. So a wise person refuses to just accept an either or solution without really examining it. Applying this to a practice of moving away from worry, we can balance our worrisome negative thoughts with positive ones like we were just talking about, to find plausible situations or plausible solutions to scenarios and to how to apply our strengths. So first, let's consider how we can balance, look for the both and in our strengths. Aristotle considered wisdom to be the master virtue or strength of all other virtues. It's the virtue that can help us decide which other strengths we should apply in any given situation and the potency of that strength. A strength's golden mean is the optimal expression of a given strength, depending on the individual and context. So too much or too little can turn into either excess or deficit. And clearly this crisis is not where we want to underuse or overuse strength. So 2 of my strengths that are correlated with wisdom are creativity and love of learning. And as I mentioned before, I can tend to catastrophizing. So I definitely overused my strength of creativity initially by imagining all sorts of tragic and horrible scenarios, and then acting on some of those. So to just understand that and to like back off it, creativity is a strength, knowing that if I overuse it, it can get me in trouble here. Another, love of learning. If I overuse that strength, and I could just dive into all the news all day long and learn about all the deaths and all the things that were happening badly in the world. This one I applied a little bit more wisdom and discernment to early, luckily. So I've been trying to stay on top of what I need to know, and then use that love of learning instead of diving into that toward things like wisdom and learning about webinars and Zoom to enable me to find my own agency and feel like I can be of service. So secondly, balancing your worries. We're trying to get away from rumination and catastrophizing, but sometimes that's easier said than done. So one strategy is actually to go to the worst case scenario and fully imagine it and feel it and see what you can learn from that you can put into action to maybe mitigate it, and then what you could let go of. So the other big lesson here is often you will find, if you really go there, that you will be able to handle it. I've heard, I don't know where exactly, but that one of our biggest fears as humans is not all the bad things that might happen, but the thought that we can't handle it when it does happen. And there's examples all day long of people who rise up and handle really, really, really bad things. So going to the worst case scenario, the key here, again, because we have a negativity bias and the balance, is then the important thing is to imagine the opposite, the best case scenario. So what would that look like? And what would you do? How could you handle that? And then do the same thing for a more realistic scenario. And a really great trick here, especially in the worst case scenario, is to imagine you're discussing this with a dear friend. What advice would you give that friend? And then give it to yourself in the third person, as if you were talking to your friend. This research suggests this practice of self-distancing can give you perspective and can help you feel distant, help you detach yourself from emotional situations, cope with negative emotions, and it certainly would be helpful for stress, anger, and worry. So I use this worst case scenario strategy when the reality of the crisis really hit me a few weeks ago. And I was trying to think about what really am I afraid of? What's keeping me up most at night right now? It shifts. But in that moment, my worst case scenario was that both my husband and I would get the virus and we would both die. And so I went fully into this scenario, even from the place of the other world, death looking back. And what I realized was I wasn't so much afraid of dying. I was afraid of leaving my family a huge mess. And embarrassingly, my husband and I haven't updated our estate plan since we got married 16 years ago. And it's complicated. We have stepchildren and assets, personal and combined assets and businesses. And so if we both died, our kids would be left with just having to go to probate and figuring it all out. And I just couldn't bear that from my imagined death. So having gone through this exercise, I decided to do something about it. So we hired a lawyer and we got it done. So that, and I actually really am sleeping well now, I think, just having that one done. Then we went to the opposite and said, what's best case scenario? And the best case scenario, we wouldn't die, we wouldn't get the virus, life would go on, we'd live long, happy life, everything's great. And then we realized, whoa, we better do something. What's that calling us to do? And we realized, okay, we got to get a financial plan together. We've lost a lot in this market, and if we're gonna live a long, happy life, we got to make sure that we're planning for that. So we are. So we're taking those. So that's the step 4, jumping, and then moving into step 5, jumping into action. So you can use that discernment to figure out where to jump into action. And like I said before, wisdom by definition is action oriented and always empowering, because the action will wiggle loose the worry. So first step, again, identify what's worth listening to underneath the message of the worry. What can you control to mitigate the risk or the future you're fearing? Focus on that. And at least for now, let go of the rest. And again, if it's too scary to let go of all that worry, just know you can always pick it up again, just like that little ball for my puppy, if you think it's going to serve you. So unfortunately, it won't go away, and action is probably the best antidote to anxiety. Making decisions, even with so much uncertainty, increases your agency, your self-confidence, and actually gets you loosened up again from that worry. And even decisions we may deem as wrong when we look in retrospect, we need to remember that wisdom is making those tough decisions using purpose, ethics, and the common good as our compass, and then discernment, balance, our strengths, experience, and knowledge to do the best we can in any given moment. We don't know how it's all going to play out until later. So when we add self-compassion, looking back, it's important to realize that you didn't have the perfect information going forward. We may get only 50% of these decisions right when we look from a rear view mirror, but if we don't make any decisions or act, we're getting 100% wrong. So I don't believe there are any right or wrong decisions in the big scheme of things, but that's a whole nother webinar. So WHOOP it. Gabrielle, WHOOP is a great, simple, scientifically validated approach to moving into action. This woman, Gabrielle Oettingen of NYU and the University of Hamburg, developed this based on 20 years of scientific research. And it's just a really simple, easy to learn mental strategy that brings you closer to achieving your goals. So it's basically, what's your wish? What outcomes do you want from it? And then the key here is, what are the obstacles that may get in the way of achieving that outcome? And then planning to move forward, including how will you overcome those obstacles when they come up. So step 6, briefly, is transcend. It's about transcendence. And I added transcendence into my definition of wisdom, which is not part of Aristotle's practical wisdom, but definitely is part of Eastern philosophy and most religions that include a transcendent experience in their definitions of wisdom. For the purposes of this exercise and moving from worry to wisdom, I've used the term very loosely, mostly to just talk about how do we get out of our heads and tap into our inner wisdom. So strategies like faith, mystery, or spirituality through meditation, yoga, prayer are more traditionally what we think of as transcendent, could be transcendent experiences. But there's also a lot of experiences that or activities that we could take on that have been scientifically validated to increase well-being, like being of service to others, spending time in nature, counting blessings, expressing gratitude, exercising, sleeping well, and actually naming your emotions and honoring them. So finally, step 7 is tying these decisions and actions to the common good. For Aristotle, all wisdom and wise acts require a focus on the common good, which which benefits society as a whole versus the individual or sectors of society. And interestingly, no surprise, research suggests that focusing on servicing others, and recent research looked at setting goals, compassionate goals versus self-serving goals, are effective tools in lowering depression and lowering anxiety, and they actually predict relationship satisfaction, both for the individual practicing the service and for those that they have relationships with. So focusing on the common good can alleviate your worry, do good for the world, and also do you personal good as well. So finally, wrapping up, in summary, we obviously don't have time to go through an exercise here to actually put this all to work for you, but I'd like to leave you with the process for practicing these 7 steps on your own, and hope they can help you move from a state of worry and anxiety and fear to a state of calm, acceptance, action, and inner wisdom. So the first one would be just naming a worry that's really holding you hostage, and then do something that transcendent list. Take 3 deep cleansing breaths, or run, or meditate, to kind of get out of your head and into your body and really be able to focus from a holistic standpoint on these steps. Then follow these 7 steps one by one and see where it takes you to help loosen the grip. A key thing, again, getting into action, is identify a single action that you can do in the next 24 hours to create momentum, and ideally every day. Then commit to the 7 steps at least for the next 7 days. If you want to do a deep dive, focus on 1 step per week or even 2. And if you want community, a community that's going to be doing this and be part of that and sharing and really do a deep dive together, email me. I'm going to be doing a 14-week workshop around this. Track your progress. Rate how you're feeling every day. You do a 1 to 5, a smiley face, frowny face, a neutral face, but each day, so you just see how things are going and if it's actually working. Celebrations are so important, especially for small wins. Don't wait until all of a sudden you feel totally different. And then create community, support others, reach out for support, and again, think about that common good. So I want to thank you all so much for showing up. And Raphael is here, has, I think, been monitoring questions in chat. So between us, we'll see what we can do. We've got about 15 minutes. And Ref, can you hear me? Are you muted?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. I have not spotted a question just yet.
Okay, so if anybody, I wonder if we could, well, so we don't have everybody talking over each other, maybe the best thing, if you wanted to ask a question, or I'd love any feedback or comments you have, maybe just raise your hand and then we can just call on you verbally, or you can type something in the Q&A, I think. So I'm trying to, still new to this Zoom thing. Oh, thank you there too. So anything, oh, I see. Raphael, are you seeing any raised hands or questions? Because I don't, oops.
Yeah, I found one. What aspects of phronesius would have helped you?
Would have helped me in the COVID crisis. That's just it's a typed in, right? So
Yeah.
this is mostly
Oh,
based.
when your husband died.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So phronesis, just for those of you who don't know, that's the Greek term for practical wisdom. Aristotle called it phronesis. So, I think that's what sort of these whole 7 steps. I think the one that helped me most was the one I talked about, the discernment of and the balance of truth versus what I was kind of making up. So it's that Aristotle talked about within any given context and given situation, to show up in that moment with your strengths and knowledge and experience, and to discern the best course of action, and generally it's the middle path. So I didn't know any of this back then, but when I look back, I think it was kind of every day, what's the right course of action. And 2 weeks in a hospital room in a coma, it is literally like time stands still. There is no time, and it's forever, and it's a minute all at the same time. So it's kind of really living in the moment, and I think that's what the discernment part helped me do.
Thank you, Jill. Also, we're getting some questions about, will this be posted? Yes, this will be posted on the MAPP alumni page. A link will be provided in the chat box.
Thanks, Rob. Anything else?
So I have a question for you. Like, in terms of your process for putting together the steps, how did mindfulness play a key role for you? Because it seems like throughout each of the steps, there is some sort of mindful or spiritual practice.
Oh, I love that question. Thank you. Yeah, and it's interesting because that one, just back into that question on phronesis. So when I was putting these 7 steps together based on the definition I had derived in my research, Aristotle also talks about Sophia as a concept that sort of ties scientific knowledge with more kind of the spirit side of it. And so I think that really hit me as well, and also this transcendence. So I think some of the philosophers were so in their heads, it was hard to, when I'm using this for business, it's also a little bit more difficult to go tap into that piece. But putting this together and thinking about what for me is the most powerful part of this, it is, and that wasn't part of phronesis in that hospital situation, but in this situation, I think that transcendence and mindfulness is really important to just center before you can really take these steps, especially things like understanding your purpose, and trying to discern the best action and reaction to do in any given moment. I think it really does need a full body. There's a lot of evidence and some sort of somatic research that shows that so much of our knowledge and actually intelligence resides not in our brains, but in our bodies. So to be able to use both of those, it's super important to tap into. And then, of course, the transcendent, the soul spirit piece, and that faith ties me personally to something bigger and some mystery bigger than myself. And it makes me feel a little less in control. Like I don't need to control it all, because there's something out there that's, nature's going to just keep on keeping on with or without us. And there's some big things at play that hopefully will be helpful in this.
Yeah, so it's part of a wider stance on life itself and how you integrate that across. One of the other couple of questions, sorry, Loretta, I missed your earlier question, about what's the difference between anxiety and worry? Do you
Hmm.
mind elaborating?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I would call, and it's not I would, but the research I've done, which isn't an extensive because I use the term worry for this purpose, for this webinar, and I haven't really researched a lot. But from what I did research, I would call worry a subset of anxiety. Worry generally is considered a little bit more, it's it's more mild, and then excessive worry, the rumination, and what we think of as, thoughts we can't let go of, that can lead to like an acute anxiety disorder, which is this doctor in San Francisco called it pre-traumatic stress. So anxiety is a more it's just a heavier hit, basically.
Thank you, Jill. The other thing, got another question. What do you know now that you wish you knew back then when you lost your husband?
Oh, I think and I forget it. It's so crazy how I go in these same spins, and I do that's part of this wisdom, to go back to your life experiences, to remember, and this is important for me. I've done really hard things as my whole family has gone through really hard things, and we can do it, and your spirit rises up to meet the challenge. So I think if I had known that, would I have believed it? I don't know. Because now sometimes I forget too, like I don't think I can handle this, but I think the number one lesson is I can handle it. The worst stuff, just there's like unimaginable things I can't, and like, one of the great fear, and which I didn't put in this because I knew I would lose it, probably more than my husband and myself dying, is my children. And I can't go there because I don't think I can handle it. But I know I can, because I know so many people have lost children, which is so sad, and so many friends who've lost spouses, because there's a community when you're part of that. And everybody rises and finds a way to honor them and go forward. So I think just knowing that, and in this crisis, again, knowing that we're going to get through this, and it's not going to be the same, and some things will be better and some things will be worse, and we never would have invited it in, but we can look for ways to grow and be better. That's kind of post-traumatic growth. I think that was if I could go back and tell myself before that, I think that would be my biggest message. You're gonna be able to handle this. I wish you all worry-free well-being and health and safety and wisdom. And please feel free to reach out. And I am very grateful to all of you, and be safe and be well. Thank you.